Alright, let's explore the deep. Leedsichthys. In 1886, a fossil hunter named Alfred Leeds was excavating the Oxford Clay Formation near Peterborough, England, when he pulled fragments of bone from the rock that didn't match anything in the existing literature. The creature they belonged to was so large and so poorly understood that scientists spent the next 130 years arguing about its own dimensions. They named it Leedsichthys problematicus. The species name means problematic. They were not wrong. Before Leedsichthys, the Jurassic seas of 165 million years ago were understood as the domain of marine reptiles, of plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, creatures that ruled through speed and teeth. A fish capable of challenging that dominance seemed unlikely. Fish, in that era, were presumed to occupy a secondary tier. What Leeds had found shattered that assumption before anyone fully realized what they were looking at. The problem was the skeleton. Leedsichthys was so enormous that its cartilaginous body rarely preserved, leaving only scattered bony fragments for scientists to reconstruct. Early estimates placed its length at over 27 meters. The 2005 reanalysis by Jeff Liston dramatically revised that figure downward to 16 or 17 meters, which is still longer than a school bus and still the largest ray-finned fish in the history of life on Earth. Despite that size, it had no teeth. It was a filter feeder, surviving entirely on plankton and small crustaceans, inhaling the ocean rather than hunting it. That paradox is what makes Leedsichthys genuinely strange. The largest fish that ever lived was effectively harmless to anything it couldn't accidentally swallow. It shared its ocean with Liopleurodon, a marine reptile that could have taken a bite from its flank and responded to that threat by growing larger and eating smaller. Evolution in this case scaled up the gentlest possible strategy to its absolute extreme. For 130 years, scientists couldn't agree on how large it was. The bones keep surfacing, the debate keeps reopening. And somewhere in the Oxford clay, there are almost certainly fragments of something larger still waiting to be found. Leedsichthys. Picture the western interior seaway, a shallow continental sea that split North America from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic during the late Cretaceous, roughly 85 million years ago. It was warm, productive, and extraordinarily dangerous. And moving through it, just beneath the surface, was a 6-meter fish with a bulldog jaw and the worst impulse control in the fossil record. Paleontologists call it Xiphectinus audax. The Latin means bold sword ray. The boldness, it turned out, was frequently fatal. The western interior seaway is one of the most productive fossil environments ever discovered, and Xiphectinus is among its most commonly recovered large predators. Well-preserved specimens have been found across Kansas, Alabama, and into Europe, suggesting a wide range and a successful predatory strategy. That strategy was simple and violent. Locate prey, open the projecting lower jaw, and swallow it whole. Xiphectinus could consume animals approaching 1.8 meters in length in a single strike. The most famous specimen in the fossil record was discovered in Kansas in 1952 by the paleontologist Charles Sternberg. When Sternberg's team split open the rock slab, they found a 4-meter Gillicus arcuatus preserved almost perfectly inside the ribcage of a Xiphectinus. The prey fish was intact, its fins and scales undamaged. The Gillicus had apparently ruptured the stomach of its predator during the struggle, killing both animals simultaneously. Sternberg, who had spent 14 years searching for a perfect specimen, called it the finest find of his career. What that fossil captures is a specific and recurring failure of predatory judgment. Xiphectinus was large enough to dominate most of its ocean, fast enough to run down almost anything in open water, and aggressive enough to attempt prey that should have been left alone. It shared its sea with mosasaurs, which preyed on Xiphectinus in turn, and even that pressure didn't moderate its ambitions. If the most feared fish in its ocean could be killed by a single act of overreach, what does that say about the creatures higher up that chain? The fossil record doesn't moralize, but it does keep score. Sea scorpion. Long before any vertebrate had placed a limb on dry land, something was already at the top of the food chain, and it looks like a nightmare assembled from the wrong parts. The Eurypterids, commonly called sea scorpions, appeared approximately 460 million years ago, and they would persist for nearly 200 million years, surviving extinctions that erased most of their contemporaries. The largest known species, Jacalopterus rhenani, reached an estimated 2.5 meters in length. It is the largest arthropod ever discovered, and its closest living relatives are the horseshoe crab and the modern scorpion. To understand why the sea scorpions matter, you have to understand how long 200 million years actually is. Dinosaurs existed for roughly 165 million years. The Eurypterids outlasted that by a significant margin, colonizing marine environments, freshwater systems, and possibly semi-terrestrial habitats across a span of time that makes most evolutionary success stories look like brief experiments. The evidence for Jacobopterus' scale came from a single fossilized claw discovered in Germany in 2007, measuring 46 centimeters. Researchers used that claw to extrapolate the total body length, and the result forced a formal revision of the maximum possible size for arthropods. The study, published in Biology Letters, also noted that oxygen levels in the Silurian atmosphere were significantly higher than today, which may explain how an invertebrate grew to proportions that should, by modern standards, be physiologically impossible. Higher oxygen allowed larger tracheal systems, larger muscles, larger bodies. Not all Eurypterids were giants. The group spanned from thumbnail-sized filter feeders to those apex predators with raptorial claws, occupying nearly every ecological niche available in aquatic environments. That range is itself remarkable, suggesting a degree of adaptive flexibility rare in any lineage. They finally vanished only at the end Permian extinction 252 million years ago in the single largest mass extinction event in Earth's history. If higher oxygen alone can take a scorpion and scale it to 2.5 meters, consider what the same atmospheric shift would do to the creatures alive in our oceans today. The sea scorpions are gone, but the variable that built them is not fixed: Tully monster. In 1955, an amateur fossil collector named Francis Tully was searching the Mason Creek Formation in Illinois when he cracked open an iron carbonate nodule and found something inside that he could not identify. He brought it to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. The scientists there could not identify it either. They named it Tulemonstrum gregarium, the Thule monster, which is not a scientific designation but a functional one because nobody had a better category for what they were looking at. The Mason Creek Formation preserves soft-bodied organisms with extraordinary fidelity, organisms that would normally leave no trace in the fossil record. This made it one of the most scientifically important Lagerstätten in North America. It also made the Tully monster's persistence as an unresolved mystery all the more unsettling. This creature lived approximately 307 million years ago during the Carboniferous period, and it is the state fossil of Illinois, which means an officially unclassifiable animal has been honored as the representative fossil of an entire American state. Tulemonstrum had a long, soft body, a claw-like proboscis at the front used to capture prey, and eyes mounted on stalks extending from a rigid transverse bar crossing its body. No living animal shares this arrangement. The central question, whether it is a vertebrate or an invertebrate, remains formally unresolved. A 2016 study published in Nature argued it possessed a primitive notochord and gill pouches, placing it among the vertebrates. A 2019 study published in Paleontology directly contradicted that analysis. Both were conducted by credentialed researchers using the same fossil material and reached opposite conclusions. The irony is that preservation is not the problem. The Mason Creek nodules have given scientists soft tissue, eye structure, and gut contents. The evidence is extraordinarily detailed. The problem is that the animal doesn't fit anywhere. It appears in the fossil record, persists for a geological moment, and vanishes without confirmed relatives in any direction. After 60 years of study, the best answer science has is that it is not sure. For a creature this well preserved, that silence is not humility. It is a genuine admission that the tree of life has branches no longer attached to anything we recognize. Dunkleosteus. 360 million years ago, before sharks had finalized their design, before the ocean had produced anything resembling a modern fish, a creature with no teeth was generating the most destructive bite force of anything that had ever lived. It had no teeth because it didn't need them. In place of teeth, Dunkleosteus terrelli carried two self-sharpening blades of bone, honed against each other with every strike, functioning as biological scissors that cut through armor plating as cleanly as modern tools cut through foil. Paleontologists named it after David Dunkel, curator at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, who first described it formally. Dunkleosteus belonged to a group called the placoderms, armored fish that dominated the Devonian seas for 20 million years. The late Devonian, roughly 358 to 382 million years ago, was a world where armored prey was the norm, where everything that wanted to survive had developed some form of external protection. Dunkleosteus evolved specifically to defeat that protection, and it succeeded completely. The mechanics were extraordinary. A 2006 study published in Biology Letters by Westneat and Anderson calculated a bite force at the blade edges approaching 55,000 newtons, stronger than a great white shark by a significant margin. More remarkably, Dunkleosteus could open its jaws in 1/50th of a second, generating a suction force that pulled prey into its mouth before evasion was physically possible. It reached lengths of 8 to 9 meters, though the body was largely cartilaginous and rarely fossilizes. What survives are the bony head shields, massive and heavily armored, staring up from museum cases across the world. Fossilized boluses found near Dunkleosteus specimens tell an additional story. These compacted balls of bone and scales are the parts it couldn't digest, regurgitated after feeding, the same mechanism modern owls use to eject pellets. It ate so aggressively that it regularly had to undo part of its own meal. When the Devonian mass extinction arrived 359 million years ago, Dunkleosteus vanished with 75% of all species on Earth. The most dominant predator its ocean had ever seen left behind nothing but shields and questions. When the most effective predator ever produced has no teeth and a body that barely preserves, how many others have we simply never found? Otodus megalodon. 23 million years ago, a shark began its ascent that would make every other ocean predator in Earth's history look provisional. It wasn't the largest animal to ever live. But no creature before or since has combined its size, its bite force, and its duration of dominance in a single package. And the reason it still grips the human imagination isn't the scale. It's what we still don't know. An Otodus megalodon, reclassified from Carcharodon megalodon as recently as 2012, ruled the world's oceans for nearly 20 million years and left behind almost nothing but its teeth. That reclassification matters more than most people realize. By moving Megalodon out of the great whites genus, scientists effectively dismantled every reconstruction built on the assumption that the two animals shared a body plan. The museum models, the film posters, the diagrams in textbooks, all of them assume Megalodon looked like a scaled-up great white shark. The 2012 revision suggests they may have looked substantially different. What Megalodon actually looked like remains an open question. The teeth are the primary evidence, and they are extraordinary. Individual specimens approach 19 centimeters in length, the largest recovered from the coastline of South Carolina. Bite force estimates, extrapolated from jaw width and tooth geometry, range from 108,000 to 182,000 newtons, roughly 10 times a great white. Fossil whale bones show distinctive Megalodon strike patterns concentrated at cranial regions, suggesting it targeted the skull to incapacitate large prey immediately rather than bleeding it out. A 2020 study published in Historical Biology used growth models scaled to Megalodon proportions and concluded that newborn pups were likely already 2 meters long at birth, larger than most adult sharks alive today. The nurseries of the largest shark that ever lived were somewhere in the shallow, warm water seas of the Miocene, and they were almost certainly terrifying. Megalodon's official extinction date is approximately 3.6 million years ago. The teeth keep washing up on beaches, fresh-looking, barely eroded. And every few years, someone finds one closer to the surface than geology can comfortably explain, Anomalocaris. 520 million years ago, during the Cambrian explosion, when animal life was diversifying into nearly every body plan that would ever exist, one creature was already at the apex. The food chain was weeks old in geological terms, and something had already climbed to the top of it. Anomalocaris canadensis, which translates as abnormal shrimp from Canada, was 1 meter long in an ocean where almost nothing else exceeded a few centimeters. It was the largest animal on Earth, and it had been hiding in plain sight in the fossil record for 50 years before anyone realized what it was. The misidentification is one of the great cautionary tales in paleontology. When the first fragments were described in 1892, the circular mouth was classified as a separate jellyfish species. The frontal claws were described as a species of shrimp. The body was filed under yet another category. 3 separate species descriptions were published for what was, in reality, one animal. It took the discovery of a complete specimen in the Burgess Shale to reveal that the mouth, the claws, and the body all belong together, a realization that changed how paleontologists approach every fragmentary fossil that followed. The biology, once correctly assembled, was extraordinary. A 2011 study published in Nature by John Patterson and colleagues analyzed the compound eyes of Anomalocaris and found up to 16,000 lenses, producing visual acuity comparable to modern dragonflies. This was sophisticated predatory vision appearing 100 million years earlier than anyone had assumed was possible. The implication is that complex sensory systems can evolve far faster than the standard models predict, which forces a revision not just of Cambrian ecology, but of evolutionary theory itself. The mouth was circular, composed of interlocking plates, and could not fully close, which suggests Anomalocaris may have specialized in soft prey rather than hard-shelled animals, despite its fearsome appearance. Its lineage gave rise to all modern arthropods, including insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Every ant, every crab, every spider on Earth is a distant consequence of this misidentified shrimp. If the rules of predation were written 520 million years ago by a creature we spent a century misidentifying, what else in that Cambrian record are we still reading wrong? Opabinia. In 1972, at a meeting of the Paleontological Association in Oxford, a paleontologist named Harry Whittington presented his reconstruction of a Cambrian animal to a room of colleagues. The audience laughed out loud. It was not a polite or uncertain laugh. It was the involuntary response of trained scientists confronted with something that seemed too absurd to be real. Then they looked closer and the laughter stopped. The animal was real. It had lived 505 million years ago in the Cambrian seas of what is now British Columbia, Canada, and it had 5 eyes. Opabinia regalis was recovered from the Burgess Shale, the same formation that produced Anomalocaris and Hallucigenia, and it was formally described by Whittington in 1975 in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London. 3 eyes on stalks to the left. 2 eyes on stalks to the right, no bilateral symmetry to its visual system. A long, flexible proboscis extending from the front of its body, tipped with a claw, used to seize prey and pass it backward to a mouth located underneath and behind the head. 15 body segments, each with overlapping gill structures along the sides. Approximately 4 to 7 centimeters long, soft, fragile, and utterly unlike anything alive before, during, or after its time. No confirmed living relatives have ever been identified. Its phylogenetic position has been actively debated for 50 years without resolution. Whittington's 1975 paper remains the foundational document because no complete revision has succeeded in placing Opabinia definitively within any known animal group. Stephen Jay Gould used it as a central exhibit in his 1989 book, Wonderful Life, arguing that Opabinia proved evolution had run experiments it then abandoned entirely. If you rewound the tape of life and played it again, Gould argued, the result would look nothing like what we have now. The counter-argument that evolution is constrained towards similar solutions by physics and chemistry is still unresolved. Opabinia sits at the center of that debate, 5-eyed and patient, waiting for an answer that has not arrived. It had 5 eyes, a claw on its face, and a mouth in the wrong place. It lived 505 million years ago, and science still cannot tell you what it was related to. Some questions don't get easier with time. Hallucigenia. When paleontologists first reconstructed a Cambrian creature from the Burgess Shale in the 1970s, they built it with the legs on top, the spines on the bottom, and the head on what turned out to be the tail. For 40 years, the published reconstruction appeared in textbooks, in museum displays, and in scientific literature as established fact. It was completely, precisely wrong in every direction simultaneously. Simon Conway Morris named it Hallucigenia sparsa in 1977. The name means dreamlike, chosen because the animal looked hallucinated. He was more accurate than he knew. Hallucigenia lived approximately 505 million years ago in the same Cambrian seas that produced Opabinia and Anomalocaris. The Burgess Shale Formation in British Columbia preserved it in extraordinary detail, which is precisely why the error is so significant. The preservation was good enough to show the spines, the walking appendages, the overall body shape. Scientists had all the evidence they needed, and they still assembled it backward. The original reconstruction placed the creature walking on its rigid dorsal spines, with soft tentacles waving from what was actually its underside. This version stood without challenge for 4 decades. The correction came in 2015, in a paper published in Nature by Martin Smith and Jean-Bernard Caron from the University of Cambridge. Their analysis confirmed the correct orientation, established that the spines were dorsal armor, and identified the actual walking appendages as the soft structures previously placed on top. More remarkably, they located the true head, A dark circular blob at one end had been assumed to be the face for 40 years. It was decay fluid that had leaked from the real head at the other end during fossilization. The answer was there in the rock the entire time, and the wrong end had been called the head for 4 decades. The 2015 paper also revealed microscopic tooth-like structures lining the throat of Hallucigenia, tiny circular rings of teeth spiraling inward. This feature is shared with modern velvet worms and arrow worms, confirming Hallucigenia's placement on the evolutionary tree as an early relative of all modern arthropods. The answer to its identity was hidden in its throat the entire time, in structures invisible to the naked eye, waiting for the right question. If we had this animal inverted in every direction for 40 years, and the correction came from teeth hidden in its throat, what else in the fossil record are we still holding upside down right now? The Cambrian explosion. 538 million years ago, in a geological blink so fast it still has no accepted explanation, almost every major body plan that has ever existed on Earth appeared simultaneously. Nearly all of the roughly 30 to 40 distinct animal phyla alive today appear in the Cambrian fossil record within a window estimated at 13 to 25 million years, which, in geological terms, is essentially instantaneous. Before it, the Ediacaran fauna, soft-bodied, largely immobile organisms with no clear connection to what followed. After it, the entire animal kingdom assembled almost completely as if from an instruction that arrived all at once. Charles Darwin saw it in 1859 and called it the most obvious and gravest objection to his theory of natural selection in On the Origin of Species. He expected that patient excavation would eventually reveal the gradual ancestors. 165 years later, those gradual ancestors have not appeared. The 2 primary fossil windows into this event, the Burgess Shale of British Columbia, discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, and the Chengjiang Biota of Yunnan Province, China, discovered in 1984, have only deepened the problem. The more clearly we see the Cambrian, the more abrupt the transition appears. The competing explanations are extensive and none is sufficient. Snowball Earth thawing and releasing ecological opportunity. Rising atmospheric oxygen enabling larger, more complex bodies. The evolution of predation creating an arms race that compressed millions of years of divergence into thousands. Each hypothesis explains a piece. None explains the whole, and none accounts for the rate. Studies examining gene family emergence during the Cambrian have found rates of morphological innovation that exceed anything in the subsequent 500 million years combined, not by a small margin, by a significant one. Several Cambrian phyla appear in that window and then vanish entirely, leaving no living descendants. Every creature on this list, Anomalocaris, Opabinia, Hallucigenia, was a product of this single incomprehensible event. And the most unsettling fact is not that the event happened, but what it implies. If life diversified this completely this fast once, the mechanisms of evolution we use to explain the rest of natural history may be incomplete. The Cambrian explosion is not a solved chapter. It is an open accusation that the model has a gap in it. Every animal alive today, including every human being, traces its fundamental design back to a window of time so narrow that early geologists refused to believe the fossil record was accurate. Darwin saw it as the hardest problem in biology. 165 years later, it still is. And every strange creature on this list is a fragment of evidence from a crime scene where we still don't know what caused the crime. 10 creatures. 10 entries in the fossil record that refuse to resolve into comfortable explanations. What connects them is not just strangeness, it is the specific kind of strangeness that survives scrutiny, that gets more puzzling the more carefully it is examined. Science has made extraordinary progress in reading the deep past, and the honest conclusion of that progress is that the further back we look, the stranger and more surprising life becomes. The textbook version of prehistory is a clean line from simple to complex, from small to large, from primitive to sophisticated. The actual fossil record is something else entirely. It is full of animals that had no business existing, no clear ancestors, no obvious descendants, and no place in the neat progression we were taught to expect. If these creatures did anything, it is this. They proved that life is far more inventive, far more extreme, and far more willing to abandon its own experiments than any model has yet accounted for. The fossil record isn't a library, it's a crime scene, and we are still working out what happened. Leave a comment telling us which creature unsettled you most, and subscribe if you want to keep following the evidence, wherever it leads. These animals lived in worlds we can barely reconstruct, built bodies we still can't fully classify, and vanished before we arrive to ask why. The deepest oceans and oldest rocks still hold their answers. We just haven't asked the right questions yet,